The average garage in a lot of households can't actually fit a car anymore. Not because the garage got smaller, because it slowly turned into storage for everything that didn't have a real home anywhere else in the house. A Scandinavian household handles this differently, and not just in the garage. Today, 15 specific things that get cleared out of the parts of a home most people never think to declutter. There's a reason this particular set of spaces gets overlooked so consistently, worth naming before getting into the list itself. Most decluttering advice focuses on rooms people actually spend time in: the living room, the kitchen, the bedroom, the garage, the storage closet, the office corner. These are transitional spaces, places things pass through or get set down temporarily. And temporary has a way of quietly becoming permanent when nobody's actively managing it. Real quick, if these videos bring you something, subscribing helps more than you'd think and takes about 2 seconds. Let's start with that garage, because it's usually the worst offender. A stack of boxes labeled "maybe useful later," some of them unopened since the last move. If a box has stayed sealed through an entire move without being opened once, whatever's inside it hasn't been missed. A Scandinavian household treats an unopened moving box as a fairly clear signal, not a storage decision still pending. There's a specific test worth applying here, borrowed loosely from the same logic behind the closet resets covered on this channel before. If a box has survived one move unopened, the honest question isn't whether to open it now, it's whether it needs to survive to the next move at all. Second, a home gym setup that's quietly become an expensive clothes rack. The treadmill, the exercise bike, bought with real intention, now serving as the place where laundry gets draped on its way to being put away properly. If a piece of equipment hasn't been used in months, it's not equipment anymore. It's furniture nobody actually wanted. This is a specific, recognizable pattern worth naming directly: the aspirational purchase, made with genuine intent to use it, that quietly transitions into a piece of furniture serving an entirely different function than the one it was bought for. Third, a desk drawer, or an entire home office corner, buried under years of paperwork nobody's sorted. Old bills, warranty documents for products that were replaced years ago, printed emails that were never filed anywhere sensible. A Scandinavian approach to paperwork tends to be aggressive about digitizing what's actually needed and shredding the rest, rather than letting a drawer become a permanent archive of things nobody will ever look at again. Most paperwork accumulated this way falls into one of two categories. Either it's a document that could be found again digitally if it were ever genuinely needed, or it's a document nobody's actually looked at in years and almost certainly never will again. Fourth, holiday decorations kept for occasions that pass once a year, stored the other 11 months in a space that could be doing something more useful. This isn't about avoiding holiday decoration entirely. It's about being honest with how much space is being permanently reserved for something used briefly and rarely. A single large bin, sized to hold exactly what actually gets displayed each year, tends to work considerably better than an ever-growing collection that's outgrown its original storage several times over, without anyone actually stopping to thin it out. Fifth, craft or hobby supplies from a project that quietly got abandoned years ago. The half-finished knitting project, the paints for a hobby that lasted one enthusiastic month. If the interest that started it has moved on for real, the supplies aren't potential, they're just sitting there. There's a specific distinction worth making here, between a hobby that's genuinely on pause and one that's simply over. A pause implies an actual intention to return. A hobby that's been sitting untouched for years, with no realistic near-term plan to pick it back up, has usually just ended, whether or not anyone's actually said so out loud. Sixth, a junk drawer that's grown into something closer to a junk cabinet. Years of unsorted odds and ends nobody's had the patience to go through. Every home has a version of this drawer. A Scandinavian household tends to actually empty it periodically, rather than letting it become a permanent, ever-expanding category of its own. The trick that actually works here isn't a heroic single sorting session. It's a standing rule that the drawer gets emptied and reset on a fixed schedule, before it has the chance to grow past a manageable size again. Seventh, sports equipment from a hobby that faded years ago, still taking up a real corner of the garage or a closet. The bike that hasn't been ridden in years, the skis from a trip that was never repeated. If the activity itself is gone, the equipment isn't waiting for a comeback. It's just occupying space. There's a specific emotional pull worth naming here. The sense that keeping the equipment somehow keeps the possibility of returning to the hobby alive. In practice, the equipment sitting unused rarely predicts a genuine return to the activity. It just sits there, taking up room that could serve the life actually being lived right now. 8th. A box of old cables and chargers for devices that were replaced or discarded years ago. Nobody quite knows what most of these actually connect to anymore, and almost nobody ever needs one badly enough to dig through the box and find out. A Scandinavian approach here is blunt. If it can't be identified within a minute, it goes. This particular box tends to grow invisibly, one cable added at a time, each addition individually reasonable, the sum considerably harder to justify once it's actually laid out and examined honestly. 9th. An attic or basement serving as a general holding pattern for anything nobody's decided about yet. This is really where the maybe useful later instinct concentrates most heavily, an entire section of the house functioning as delayed decision-making rather than actual storage. Anything placed there tends to stay indefinitely, precisely because the space is treated as long-term holding, rather than a location that gets reviewed and cleared on any real schedule. 10th. A tangle of extension cords and cables, more than any household could plausibly need at once. A drawer holds 3 or 4 properly useful lengths. Beyond that, most households are simply storing a tangle nobody wants to untangle to find the right one anyway, which means the extra cords aren't actually functioning as backup. They're functioning as an obstacle to finding the one cord that's actually needed in the moment. 11th. A cabinet of empty jars and containers, kept for reuse that never actually happens. The intention is reasonable, the follow-through rarely materializes. A Scandinavian kitchen tends to keep a small, actually used set, not an ever-growing collection justified by good intentions alone. A dozen empty jars, saved with a genuine plan to use them for something eventually, tends to become 40 jars within a couple of years, at which point the original intention has long since been buried under the sheer accumulated volume. 12th. Old paint cans and half-used home improvement supplies from projects finished years ago. Paint dries out and becomes unusable well before most people get around to disposing of it properly. A can kept for touch-ups that never happen is occupying real space for a repair that was never actually going to happen either. There's a straightforward test worth applying, checking whether the paint has actually skinned over or separated. If it has, the can isn't a resource being saved. It's just waste that hasn't been disposed of yet. 13th. A balcony or garden corner cluttered with pots, tools, and planters that never made it into active use. Outdoor space gets treated with the same standard as indoor space here. If it's not being used for what it was bought for, it's not doing its job, regardless of which side of the door it happens to sit on. A stack of empty terracotta pots, bought for a gardening project that never fully materialized, tends to sit through several seasons before anyone actually addresses it directly. 14th. A collection of umbrellas by the entryway, multiplying quietly over years, most of them broken or barely functional. A household needs a small, working set. Beyond that, extra umbrellas tend to be the ones that turned inside out in the wind years ago and never got thrown away afterward. A quick check of any entryway umbrella stand tends to reveal at least 1 or 2 that clearly don't open properly anymore, kept purely out of habit rather than any actual usefulness. And 15th, the same instinct running through everything on this list. A pile of reusable shopping bags, multiplying past any reasonable number, stuffed into a drawer or cabinet that never seems to actually shrink. A household needs a handful. Beyond that, more bags aren't backup. They're simply the newest version of the same clutter this entire video has been pointing at. The irony here is worth naming directly. An item originally purchased specifically to reduce waste, accumulating into its own small category of waste, once the collection grows well past what any household actually carries to the store at once. 15 things, none of them from the room's most decluttering advice focuses on. The garage, the office corner, the storage closet, the parts of a home that get overlooked precisely because nobody's expected to keep them tidy in the first place. There's a pattern worth naming now that we've gone through all 15, because it wasn't fully visible from any single item on its own. Almost everything on this list shares the same origin story. A reasonable purchase made with genuine intent that quietly outlived the need it was bought to serve, and then kept anyway, out of habit rather than any actual ongoing usefulness. The garage, the attic, the junk drawer, none of these spaces got cluttered through one large decision. They got cluttered through dozens of small, individually forgivable moments of simply not deciding, repeated often enough that the accumulated result became the new normal without anyone quite noticing it happen. If this changed how you look at your own storage spaces, subscribing means a lot. And drop a comment with what you want covered next. I read every single one. Sit with that for a moment. I'll see you in the next one.